I'm Bob Marks.
And welcome to the game. It's been a while. We've been sort of on a hiatus, but we're happy to be back. And it's the same old topic, the San Mateo County Sheriff, Christina Corpus, and what might happen next in her life, in the lives of all of us watching this entire drama unfold. We are happy to be joined by Eliot Storch from the Deputy Sheriff's Association. Thank you for being with us, Eliot.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Charles Stone from the law firm of Goethals and Stone. In addition to just being sort of a local legal expert on some of this stuff, Charles's firm is representing a number of people who have filed claims. I don't know if they've advanced the lawsuit yet, who have filed claims in advance of a lawsuit against the county deputies, some people who feel they've been harmed in one way or another by the actions of the sheriff and her former chief of staff, Victor Ange. So thank you both for being with us. Let's start first, Eliot, with you. This has dragged on. It looks like it might well drag on. The news this week was that the hearing the Board of Supervisors wants to hold in August may have been pushed back until October. What's the morale in the office as this drags on? Because at the heart of this has been the complaints by the deputy sheriffs, the sergeants, and even captains and lieutenants that the office is, for lack of a better word, in chaos, that there's confusion, there's fear, there's concern about retaliation. What is the morale right now in the office?
Well, right now the morale is extremely low. This was something that before the Measure A vote that we expressed how exigent this is to remove Sheriff Corpus given her behavior and her actions towards us. And nothing has changed in terms of the exigency. This is still a terrible situation. People are still being mistreated. People are still being abused. People are still getting retaliated against. And you know, as this goes on, the morale gets worse and worse, especially as people feel like maybe their voices aren't being heard as they were previously.
When you say retaliated against, can you give us maybe some examples? You may be cautious about citing specific names and individuals, but what kinds of things are happening that are making people feel retaliation?
Well, one of the issues that we're seeing there were some issues with recent promotions. There are some issues with people being assigned to certain specialties. There are units that feel like they're not being treated the way that they would be in any other agency because members of those units have been vocal against Sheriff Corpus. It's one of those things where a lot of it individually does not look super terrible. However, when you combine it all together and combine it with the last several months of Sheriff Corpus's behavior, there is a clear pattern of retaliation. And you know, understandably, I don't necessarily want to go into details because I wouldn't be surprised if Sheriff Corpus or Under Sheriff Perea or Victor INJ or someone ends up watching this, and I don't want people to get retaliated against further by bringing them up. We are in such a climate of fear in the sheriff's office that I do worry that every word I say is somehow going to result in someone being harmed.
Let me
When I
ask
started the show, I
you.
neglected to mention we're also hang on just a second, Bob. We're
Sure.
also joined by our producer, Frank Bravo. We're using a technology we don't usually use, so Frank has to hang around and listen to us and avoid grimacing whenever he hears us say something we shouldn't have said. Bob, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, Charles, can you briefly outline the process that we're looking at that the board has adopted and what are the next steps going forward?
Sure, I can with some caveats that we're somewhat in uncharted territory and that I fully expect that Sheriff Corpus and her attorneys will take advantage of any opening they can to delay and obfuscate, as they've shown they are willing to do so far. For instance, as we all know, just yesterday, there was a court filing, and I think it's going to be heard. I've heard today. We'll see if that happens. But the sheriff and her attorneys made a court filing, which was somewhat surprising to me, by the way, because it involved allegations that a grand jury has requested that she testify. And those those allegations seem to me to violate what I believe to be a requirement that such things be kept confidential. My understanding of grand jury investigations and who they're calling to testify through subpoena power is not supposed to be shared with the public. So that was somewhat surprising to me that that wasn't filed under seal. I think where we are in the process is we're going to have to wait and see how this latest filing pans out. I don't suspect it's going to be successful. I do expect that the folks who are representing Ms. Corpus will certainly take advantage of any appeals process they can at this point. I can't know for sure, but it certainly appears to me that despite her repeated statements that she wants to tell her side of the story, she's taking every step possible to avoid telling her side of the story under oath, certainly. The board at some point will receive a recommendation, I imagine, from John Keene, who has been appointed as the hearing officer. He will have to conduct hearings. How those hearings are conducted, whether they will be open or closed, we'll find out. I wouldn't be surprised if the sheriff asks for it one way and then changes her mind at some point. I think it's kind of hard to figure out exactly how it's going to play out. I do hope that it's as speedy as possible. I echo what Eliot has said. I think morale is dangerously low. It was dangerously low. It's even lower now than it was before. And the fear of retaliation is very great, given that there are some things that at the least can be termed questionable in terms of actions that have been taken against people who cooperated with the Cordell investigation and subsequent investigations. And it's fascinating to me as somebody who was involved in local government for a long time and pays attention to things like this, that somebody would not be more careful about their actions in light of that fact. If you know that someone's cooperated in an investigation, sometimes in government, even if there is cause to move them to another assignment or counsel them or take some sort of HR action, wizened city attorneys or county council might tell you, hey, normally we do that, but given the fact that this person participated in an investigation, it doesn't look very good. We shouldn't do this. I don't know that she's taking advice from county council at this point, though, so that might have something to do with it.
By the way, for the record, we have repeatedly invited the sheriff and Victor NJ to come on this show. I also recently directly invited Sheriff Corpus's attorney, Thomas Mizuko, to come on, and he said he may consider it at some point. But we have been unable to successfully schedule them to come on. Every time we have a conversation with them, they say they would love to come on, and they will send us some dates, and then that just never develops. Bob.
Yeah, Charles, just following up. I might want to preface this by saying that my legal experience comes largely from watching Matlock and The Good Wife. So maybe you can help us understand the term due process. And has the board been too cautious in this process that they set up? Could they have streamlined this process and still met the standard of due process?
And for everyone under the age of 40 that's watching, Matlock was a television program involving a lawyer in a small
Yes.
town in the 80s. Those of you who are wondering what the heck, oh wait, aren't they remaking it now? So
Yeah, they are
probably
remaking it,
I'm
but
sorry.
I was referring to the old one, so you're right.
I'm not gonna be critical of the board. This is an incredibly difficult situation to get right. I don't know if there is a right. As we talked about before, when I was on the show back around the election, on election night, there's an inevitable rubbing point against the need for expediency and the want to move quickly and the desire to get it right so that you don't set up any sustainable legal action by the sheriff down the road. Due process involves giving her an opportunity to hear the accusations against her, to cross-examine witnesses who will testify against her, and she now has the opportunity to make all of that happen. But that process is also going to involve her taking an oath to tell the truth and sitting down to answer questions. And based on some of the things we've seen reported in the press, I wonder if her attorneys are going to let her do that, and if she does, whether or not she's going to take the Fifth Amendment right, invoke her Fifth Amendment right to not answer the questions. Anyone can do Monday morning quarterbacking. You could easily say it appeared very clear that the measure was going to pass and overwhelmingly pass, and there could have been a process in place that county council came up with ahead of time, and it could have been employed faster. The flip side of that coin is any presupposition as to the outcome would inevitably be used by the folks representing Ms. Corpus as evidence of bias, right? We've seen in the latest legal filing that, apparently a friendship or belonging to the same board of a nonprofit is going to be used as potential fodder for bias. So I'm sure that had the board is already being accused of bias. We know that. Had they moved any faster, they just would have they would have stoked the fires of potential bias accusations even more. So could there have been things done that could have expedited the process? I think yes. I also will point out that, as several commentators have said, and it's been reported in the paper, I don't think California has ever seen anything exactly like this before. And there's only been a few things like this before. So it's hard to be too critical when somebody's doing something for the first time, and when you're dealing with somebody who has not who has shown that they're not going to behave in any of the ways that we've come to expect elected officials to behave in situations like this. Normally, you get a situation like this where the deck seems very stacked against someone, where there's a mountain of evidence of potential crimes even, and definitely potential improper actions, and you see folks step aside for family reasons, or they find another reason, or certainly somebody in her position who I assume has a pension, a very good one, would often in these situations decide to retire early. But we're not seeing any indication she's willing to step away. And I think, if I recall correctly, for Sheriff Lori Smith in Santa Clara County, it took the grand jury telegraphing that some serious action was coming before she finally stepped down. And that might be the way it turns out here.
I want to come back to that, but first, before we do, Eliot, within the last several days, the sheriff proudly announced that she had achieved full staffing for the sheriff's office. It was during the campaign when she ran, and even since then, it was well known that there were well over 100 vacancies. It was a real problem, which was also driving some of the issues over the amount of overtime that everybody was working. Is the sheriff's office fully staffed, and what does that mean, really?
We are nowhere close to being fully staffed. I still receive, even just today, I received multiple emails from sergeants asking people to work overtime. While I understand that Sheriff Corpus has hired a lot of people, there is a difference between hiring somebody and them being anywhere close to being able to work. Sheriff Corpus used a sports analogy last year that she is the coach and the coach picks the team. But any good general manager knows that you don't draft a pitcher out of high school and expect that he's going to be facing big league batters right away. It's unrealistic. For example, for a deputy sheriff trainee, the basic police academy is 6 months. The field training program is 4 months. So even if there is no delay, and there always is a delay because there's backlogs between when academy spots are open, and delays between finishing the academy and going out to FTO, you're looking at almost a year before someone is actually able to work a shift by themselves on patrol. For jail training, the academy is still a couple months, jail training is still several months. So we are a long way away before any help arrives.
Eliot, so when she says she's fully staffed, it means she has hired somebody. That doesn't mean that person is ready to step right in and start serving as a deputy sheriff or in the corrections department. There's academy, so they're not even on duty in that role for anywhere from 2 to 6 months.
Exactly, or even longer, depending on what, whether they're a correctional officer or a deputy sheriff. For example, for my personal experience, it was over a year, including the academy, jail training, field training, and delays before it was well over a year, probably close to a year and a half between when I got hired and when I was actually a solo deputy working a patrol shift by myself. It's an extensive period of time. So yes, just like with many things Sheriff Corpus says, there might be an element of truth to it, but the overall message is completely untrue.
Go ahead, Mark. Um, I lost my question, Mark. Why don't you go ahead?
So as we're recording this in Zoom because we're having issues on the internet today, and Mark was frozen there for a second. So it looks like he's back now.
There we go.
Okay. Okay.
So I understand this problem may be particularly acute in the jail, which is a 365-day, 24/7 operation. And at some point or another, the jail simply has to be staffed. There may be other places, maybe a judge or two shares a bailiff, which is not the same thing as what's going on in the jail. You worked in the jail. What's it like in there, Eliot?
Morale still remains low. People are overworked, people are tired, people are frustrated that there seems to be no end in sight, and people feel like the administration at the highest level does not care about them. They would much rather brag on social media about how they hired a new assistant sheriff or brag about how they have full staffing, even though that's doesn't come close to the full picture. While in the meantime, people are getting mandatory to work overtime. People are, having to do more than they ordinarily would. And it's exhausting for the deputies and correctional officers who work in the jail. And fortunately, we have very, very good people who are working and they're still doing their jobs and being professional and keeping everybody safe and fulfilling their responsibilities. But at some point, it's not sustainable. And we've been saying that for a while, that it's not sustainable.
Well, Elliot, remembering my time in the county, the sheriff's department always seemed to be a very attractive place for people to want to come and work, whether they were at police departments or other places. Do you sense there may be a reluctance on the part of people as this drama plays out over God knows how long to want to come and work in the sheriff's office?
I think possibly we are still having people come in lateral, and for many new people, there is an attitude of let's get our foot in the door, and we can figure something out. If this is the right agency for me later on. So as far as how recruitment goes, I'm not sure how much it's having an impact, though it probably is. I think the bigger problem that we're seeing is with retention. For experienced, fully trained deputies who are here and who have been here and who have invested themselves in this agency, they are the people who are looking to leave. We've had several leave. We're going to have more leave because of what's going on. It's not fair to them. They can go, if they live out of county, they can go somewhere closer to home. They can go someplace where there's maybe better pay and benefits, and most importantly, they can go someplace where they don't have to worry that their own head of their agency is going to come down on them for absolutely nothing, and that they can actually be treated well by the people they work for. So we're definitely seeing that. And while Sheriff Corpus touts her recruiting successes, she has done absolutely nothing for retention. No retention bonus, no nothing. The only thing which helped retention was double overtime. And according to Sheriff Corpus, getting rid of double overtime was, her saving the taxpayers' money and her, the cause of all this. When in reality, that was the only thing that has been done in her tenure for retention.
Charles, in your work on behalf of clients, you're dealing with a lot of these issues, a lot of these people at the rank and file level. Why should we feel sorry for anybody? I mean, the harsh critic could say they're just complaining, so they're getting paid overtime. Boo-hoo. I'd love to have a job where I get paid as much as these guys get paid. They're worried about their job. Everybody worries about their job. Why should this concern anybody above and beyond? Well, it's a hard place to work. Well, lots of people have jobs that are hard places to work.
So I think you're asking a larger question about public service, or at least that's how I'm going to answer it. I think that far too often When people look at budgets, they look at the biggest line item. The biggest line item in government is usually human capital. And it's easy to look at that and say, oh my God, there goes the deputy sheriff, fully burdened with benefits and insurance and overtime. That's $250,000 a year. That sounds insane. But what I don't think they understand is the toll that the job takes on both the spirit and the mind and the body, both, all three. I've done several ride-alongs. I know what a shift looks like, or I know at least what 4 to 6 hours of a shift looks like. I've never done a full shift. I know that when I sit in my chair all day and forget to get up because I'm working on emotion, my body hurts bad. Imagine being in a cruiser all day long, driving around, you're not moving around, and then you have to go from 0 to 60 and restrain somebody, and in a very professional way, because everything's on camera and you want to present well for any possible lawsuits, and you want to present well for any potential disciplinary actions, and because you want to do right by the person you're restraining. I don't think 90% of the population can do that. It's a very hard thing to 1 minute be in a cruiser after 6 hours of not really moving around very much, and then have to go 0 to 60, evaluate a situation that involves somebody who's gotten violent on you, and restrain them in a reasonable way that is going to use as little force as necessary, but still get the result you want. That's just one aspect of this job, right? There are all kinds of other aspects of this job. We expect our officers to be community policing officers, which means to some extent they have obligations and duties that we used to attach to social workers, right? When they go out to a domestic violence call, they're not just trying to mediate the dispute, evaluate to see who, if anyone, needs to be taken into custody. They're also looking, do we need to call Child Protective Services? Do we need to put this, whichever spouse it looks like they're in bad shape, do we need to put them in touch with support services like Cora or Samaritan House? That's just two things. And then with the sheriff's office, you're also going to do some time working in the jails, which is a completely different skill set from what a normal police officer does in a city that doesn't have a jail. Do I wish teachers were paid what police officers were? Absolutely, and they should be. Do I think police officers and sheriff's deputies are overpaid? Heck no. And I think most of the people who are critical of that and say, why should we feel sorry for these people, don't understand at all what actually goes into the job. And when you say, why should anyone feel sorry for these folks? I can tell you, based on my personal experience with friends who work for the sheriff's department, with clients, that these are women and men who care deeply about the job and San Mateo County in ways that I didn't even understand, I think, a year ago. And they are respectful of the position, even if not the individual holding it. And they go in and they do their job, and they worked hard, and they believe in law and order and rule and democracy. And, I think it's a little too flippant to say, why should we, not that you were saying it, but for the folks who do say, why should we feel sorry for them? It's one of those walk a mile in their shoes, and I suspect you'd feel sorrier for them than they do for themselves.
It's okay. I've been told I was flippant more than once. Let me ask you this. Given all the time that is taken, and now they're saying the hearing might not be till October, wouldn't we have been better off if somebody had just pressed ahead with a recall, which would be being held maybe as soon as November?
That presumes you would have gotten the signatures, or they would have gotten the signatures, which is no easy task. Countywide signature gathering efforts, and this has been in my mind for other reasons because of the potential for a regional transit measure that would at least theoretically get on the ballot through a signature gathering effort in a large region. That costs millions of dollars to pay people to go out there and get those signatures. This isn't volunteers in front of Safeway in Belmont, which you could do, right? Maybe even San Mateo is small enough at 110,000 people that you could run a citizens campaign that way. But when you're talking about getting the signatures necessary for a recall, it's a substantial number. There's always a chance they don't all check out when they go to the county official for reviewing them. And so I'm not second guessing that decision at all. I think this was the right move, and I think that there are, since we all watch Marvel movies now and we talk about alternate universes, there are many alternate universes in which this was the most expeditious and smartest move. And in most other situations, I like to believe I was an elected official for a little while, and I had one recall threatened, but it was never actually carried out. But I like to believe that if the people of my community had voted to give someone the power to remove me resoundingly, that I would have the good grace to walk away. Um, maybe that's too much to hope for, but I don't think that going this route was the wrong route at all. And that's all I could say. Again, as I said earlier, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback this far down the road. I think based on everything everybody knew, um, and the timelines that they were looking at, I think it was the right move. And the recall is still out there. It won't be easy, but it's still the suspenders of the belt and suspenders approach.
Charles, it seems like in the end, if the board in fact does vote to remove the sheriff, that it's then all going to head to the courts. You could see appeals. You could see it going from one level to the next level. And theoretically, it could go on to the end of her term. Is that likely, that kind of scenario in your mind?
Well, I think there's two questions in there. The first is, could she be successful on appeal? The other is, would the removal be stayed while the appeal was taking place? That's the real question, right? And I don't know. Again, we're in somewhat uncharted territory here. Courts are historically resistant to interfere with democracy, right? They don't like it. It makes them uncomfortable, and they try to avoid it if they can. So in general, I think if a court doesn't see that some affront to the rules was created, I don't know that they're going to stay the removal if it is picked up for appeal, or if she does appeal it, right? So I think there's two questions in there, and I don't know the answer to either one with certainty. I have a suspicion that if she is removed and she appeals through the courts, that she may have to find herself removed and keep her legal battle going while not the sheriff.
The sustaining argument that her attorneys seem to be seizing on at the moment anyway is that there's been a prejudgment by the Board of Supervisors against her. And certainly 4 of the 5 members, the exception being Jackie Spear, were on record before they even voted to put this to proceed, calling for her to leave. That doesn't mean they were calling for her to be fired, but that they thought she ought to go. But it seems to me that that sounds like a legitimate argument, that they are that there's a preconceived bias in an organization or body that is supposed to sit in a quasi-judicial stance. You think that's a valid argument? You think it's one that can undo this process?
I mean, it's an argument. A city council member could say, in general, I'm opposed to 6-story development. And then a 6-story development project could come through, and they could end up voting no on it for reasons that have nothing to do with bias, and they could sue and lose that suit. And I see an analogy there, right? So just because they said, I think the sheriff should resign, I think the sheriff's done some bad things, the test is going to be, were they impartial while they sat in their role at this moment in time? And, by taking the steps that the board and the county executive have taken, for instance, by retaining an outside firm to do a thorough investigation, as I understand it, more thorough, I think, than the Cordell investigation, which was not intended to be a pre-removal investigation. That's not what it's for. I'm not being critical of Judge Cordell. I think she did great work, but it wasn't intended to be that. This is something different, and by having an independent firm conduct a thorough investigation, by appointing John Keene, the head of the probation department, as an independent fact finder, to make a recommendation on, or hearing officer to make a recommendation on this, I think the board has taken the smart moves that they can to insulate themselves from charges of bias. It's an argument. I don't think it's going to be a successful argument, but it is an argument. And it is hard for me as a taxpayer. Read your column this morning, Mark. It's hard for me as a taxpayer to fathom the amount of money that's being spent on this right now as a county taxpayer, and especially hard for me to swallow that the county is paying for Sheriff Corpus's legal bills. I understand why they did that, and I think it's actually a very laudable move because it robs her of another argument. It robs her of the argument that she's being unfairly trod upon and that she can't afford her defense, or many other things they could say. But I guess that's my way of saying that if I was being paid by the hour and I knew someone else was having to foot the bill, and I already had a duty as an attorney to mount as vigorous as possible representation of my client, I'd certainly make every argument under the sun as well. And I think that's what this is.
You referenced whether she might opt to just leave, which apparently there's certainly nothing to indicate that she's even considering that. Of course, that would be the right position for her to take right up until she does leave. But there have been articles that she assumes some level of personal liability should she basically lose the protection of her office. As far as you know, is that valid?
Well, as I understand the law, big caveat there, but for instance, I have sued public entities before and made a lot of government claims for clients, and punitive damages can end up creating personal liability, right? So there already may be avenues of exposure for her, regardless of whether she remains a sheriff or not. If a jury were to award punitive damages and the county board of supervisors were to vote, we don't want to indemnify her for those punitive damages, I don't think they are legally required to do so. I don't know if the Brian Phillip complaint has punitive damages. As I sit here, I can't remember, but I know that some of the government tort claims do include a prayer for relief in terms of punitive damages. Now, she certainly loses the imprimatur of the position for PR purposes once she's out. And it hasn't escaped my imagination that part of the reason she's not leaving is because right now when she sits in front of a microphone in an interview, it says Sheriff Christina Corpus. And the minute she's gone, it just says Christina Corpus and the titles matter, right? And so it may be because she retains some access to a bully pulpit as long as she's sheriff. I don't know. But I don't think there's a lot of merit to the idea that she's sticking around because it's going to create more legal liability if she leaves.
Yeah. Eliot, I want to clarify a little bit some of the things you were talking about, or understand it better is probably a better way of putting it. Essentially, what it sounds like you're saying is there are people being transferred for reasons they don't fully understand, or they're being denied transfers, or even the opportunity to advance. Can you clarify that a little bit about what's going on that makes you think that this is retaliatory?
Well, for example, and I'll give you a little bit of an older example just because it's already been public, so I'm a little less concerned someone's going to be retaliated against for it. We currently do not have a policy for how long someone can remain in a specialty unit. So specialty unit being investigations, narcotics task force, vehicle theft task force, things like that. For whatever reason, a lot of the people in these specialties have been very involved with the union. For example, I'm in investigations. We have another board member who is in one of the task forces. We have sergeants, union members who are parts of the task forces and the investigations bureau. And Under Sheriff Perea sent out a memo basically demanding that all members put in how long they, respond with how long they have been in that specialty, and that anyone who's been there for 3 years can get removed from that specialty. Obviously, the DSA fought that. That is, once again, in Sheriff Corpus's infinite ability to not follow labor law, a failure to meet and confer about would have been a completely brand new policy. But that's the kind of thing. It wasn't about, people in the jails rotating which assignment they're in every so often, or people in the courts switching judges that they bailiff for, or even people on patrol switching between day shift and night shift, or switching between our different patrol bureaus. It was targeted at the specialties, because who's been the most vocal? The specialty units, those in the specialty units. And it's things like that which keep happening. And that's kind of the clarification. It's things like that. That wasn't the first time something like that had happened. It hasn't been the last time. And while we understand that there are different ways to run an agency, and that an agency as large as this can be run a million different ways, targeting people and not communicating with the union about doing it and trying to create policies out of thin air that clearly target one group is just unacceptable.
Well, I think that's all we have. Bob, you got anything else you want to add?
No, that's it.
Eliot Storch from the Deputy Sheriff's Association, Charles Stone from the law firm of Goethals and Stone. Thank you both for being with us. We'll continue. For a political off year, this has been a story that's been interesting to follow, and apparently is never going to completely disappoint any of us in terms of things that are worth talking about. So on that note, I'll say I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Bob Marks.
And over there we have Frank Bravo, who is our producer, who's making a rare cameo appearance here. I want to reiterate, as we've talked about this issue, we have invited the sheriff and her former chief of staff several times to come on this show. We've also invited their attorney, her attorney, I should say, and they have declined, often saying they're going to come on, and then we never quite nail down a date. That being said, the offer still stands. We've been happy to have you on. You can find us at thegamepeninsula.com online and on YouTube. And thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time.